Don't lie, guys. Dayne and Brent here with special guest Larry Williams from Tiger Illustrated. So this is good little rivals collaboration that we did some version of this back in 2021. Brent, I can't remember if you were a piece of that or not. We had been doing
Yeah,
some film don't lie, but I couldn't
yeah.
remember if you were on
We
this
did some combo.
because I'm getting old and have a bunch of young children. So Larry, thanks for having us on. I know I joined your show last week, and I'm curious if any Clemson folks had some felt some type of way about some of the things that I said. I thought it was pretty neutral.
They loved it. The folks on our message board who listened, I think it was 100% approval. So
Look
they
at
really got a
that.
lot out of it.
Which is rare. But which, by the way, I thoroughly enjoyed it because I'm in higher education myself. I'm a college professor by day. So hearing about how, like, you guys talk about the business and how the education as it relates to that is changing and all that factors into my world very much so. So I thoroughly enjoyed listening. I know that.
Sorry to interrupt. One of the great, I guess, refreshing sort of revelations I've had over the years is that hardcore fans don't just like to read about and hear about what's going on with the team. They really like to learn about the background of the people like us who have a window into it, sort of a front row seat. And they love to talk about to hear us talk about the media trends and changes and journalism and all that stuff, all the behind the scenes, which is cool. I mean, it helps keep us employed. So every little bit helps. But I don't know. It's I always enjoy talking about it just because that's my trade. But Dayne, you're a fascinating guy with all your different irons in the fire. So I think hard not to be interesting in a conversation that explores a lot of that stuff.
If people want to hear that they can go to your show and check out all the stuff you asked me about my career. I want to talk about yours and begin there because I think most Georgia fans, perhaps of a little bit of age, remember you more from your Augusta days in the '90s. Take me on the path to through Larry's career and then how you ended up with your coverage of Clemson right now for Tiger Illustrated.
Yeah, started in 1998 at the High Point Enterprise. And initially I applied for a job at the Augusta Chronicle for my first job out of journalism school. And I learned that I didn't get it. And one of the smartest moves I ever made, I'm like, well, the person they hired had to come from somewhere. So I immediately learned that the person came from the High Point Enterprise in High Point, North Carolina.
Look at those reporting skills already.
That's right. So I immediately called up the sports editor who I didn't know from Adam. And he tells me, yeah, we're pretty far down the road of making a hire, but why don't you go ahead and fax me in some of your clips? And yeah, back then there was no email me this or that. And so I feverishly found a fax machine and sent in my clips. And then a few hours later, he says, when can you come up for an interview? Calls me back and go up there and interview, get the job. I was there for 8 months before I get a call from the Augusta Chronicle. The guy who had filled that position 8 months earlier was moving back to the Greensboro High Point area to work for the Greensboro News and Record newspaper to cover, I believe it was maybe the Hurricanes, NHL, PGA. And so they wanted to hire me to cover college football down at the Chronicle. I was lucky enough to have met my future wife. I was there long enough for a cup of coffee in High Point to meet my future wife, who then followed me down to Augusta, but worked for Augusta from 99 until late 03, early 04. And yeah, like you said, spent a lot of time in Athens covering the Bulldogs, Jim Donnan, Mark Richt, and really enjoyed that part of it. And then, but the only problem was I had to travel everywhere I went, whether it was Athens, Columbia to cover Lou Holtz in South Carolina, way up to Clemson to cover Tommy Bowden and the Tigers, and also some traveling to Atlanta. And it was just too superficial. I wanted to go somewhere where I could be in the town, not just to cut down on the grind of travel, but also to sort of get beneath the surface and to develop relationships, daily relationships with the people you cover. It's just hard to do that when you're, parachuting in.
Yeah.
And so the Charleston Post and Courier, which I grew up reading and had some relationships there with people who had been there for a long time, they wanted to create a bureau position in Clemson, so they could cover the Tigers on a more daily basis instead of, somebody traveling from Charleston a couple of times a week for press conferences and games and such. They had established a Columbia sports writer position when Lou Holtz took over at South Carolina in 99. Yeah, 99, to cover, because that was such a big story, of course. And so I guess 4 years later was when they decided, we kind of need to even things out, and have both teams covered by somebody in that town. And so I jumped at the chance. I'm like, man, this is exactly what I've been looking for. And come up here. And honestly, I was like, I'll maybe be here a few years and then maybe go somewhere bigger, or maybe down to Charleston. And if they find something for me down there. But the college town existence is just for me. It still is all these years later.
Same.
It's just the rhythms of the year are just you don't really get tired of them. By the time that summer gets here, you're like, God, I'm ready for these students to be gone. And then a few months later, it's just so slow that you're like, okay, I'm ready for the pace to pick up again. I'm ready for the bigness of the football season.
And being around young people that age just keeps you younger.
100%. And then, you start having kids, and then you start noticing, oh, there are lots of really cool lakes around here. Then you get a boat and you spend a bunch of time experiencing.
It becomes home. It's home.
And it really, I've thought about that a good bit recently, the last few years. Like, I remember a time where it just felt foreign, almost too foreign. And I don't remember exactly when. I'm trying to identify when it transitioned from, I still feel like sort of a visitor here, to I can't imagine ever leaving. It feels like home, a place that you're going to have nostalgia for forever, just given how important it's been in raising a family. I don't know when that point came. It might have come. Honestly, it might have related a lot with the football program ascending to a nationally, just a powerhouse status, contending for and winning national titles. Being able to have a front row seat to that, as you guys can undoubtedly attest, from the last few years, not from a fan perspective, but just from the standpoint of being a lover of college football all my life, and being able to witness, forever, you see from afar great stories developing, like Florida State and Bobby Bowden over the years, Steve Spurrier and Florida. It goes on and on. And so when Dabo Swinney has taken them to that level from 15 to 20, I'm just like, this is an honor to be able to witness this from a front row seat, and to be able to have known Dabo from the beginning, when he got here as an assistant coach, and developed a relationship with him from before he became the head coach, and just to see it all take shape. That's a long-winded way of saying I've been here forever. I'm old, but I couldn't really imagine being anywhere else, because this has just become home in so many different ways. But another part of that I like about being here is it's very close to Athens, which I love that town. I go there on a fairly regular basis to play music, but also to go down, just take little weekends to go eat good food, and just be in a really cool college town. It's, of course, a lot bigger than Clemson. And so there's a lot more going on, I think, through the year. And it's just always been one of my favorite places to go in terms of college towns.
The point you make about the energy of, we cover the team. So it's not like there's hey, we live and breathe and live and die by victories or results, but the energy that's created by being at SEC championship or at a Chick-fil-A bowl against Ohio State, like all those things that come with the success of the team just makes the job, because it eventually, as much as it is fun to do Film Don't Lie, to do Tiger History, it still is a job eventually. The energy that all that creates, it's immeasurable.
I'll never forget, and this is right along those lines, just one of those sort of pinch yourself moments that I'll carry with me until hopefully I'm really old, a lot older. It was the morning of January 10th, 2017 in Tampa. And, I had just watched Deshaun Watson throw to Hunter Renfrow with a second left for them to clinch the national title. And exactly to your point, in the moment, there's no way I'm sitting there, people are like, wait, what do you mean? You weren't sitting there pulling for them to score a touchdown and you weren't excited and all this and that. In the moment, I'm like, man, I feel pressure because I've got to sit down at some point after the game and do justice to what I just saw. And to do justice to what I just saw, I have to figure it out. I have to figure out how that happened. And that not only involves going to the locker room and trying to learn more about how that took shape, but it also involves in those just frantic moments, like the run up to that play and just trying to sort it all out in my mind. My brain just is not, I'm not smart enough to be able to just do all that, like snapping your fingers. And so it wasn't until, I don't know, 2 or 3 in the morning, I'm on the media bus that's taking us back to our hotel. It's the first time you're able to take a deep breath and sort of ask yourself, was that real? Well, first of all, did I do justice to what I saw in what I wrote? And so I'm taking the bus back, and I get a text from a good friend who's a Clemson fan, longtime Clemson fan, and he said, I think they were in their hotel or maybe at a tailgate. I don't know. Maybe they were still out in the parking lot. And he read my column to the group of people he was with, and he said he was crying, and some of the others were too. And I'm like, well, that's all I need to hear in terms of I guess I did do it justice. And that's when it just sort of hits you, like I was sort of the middleman in this moment that tens of hundreds of thousands of people sort of. I'm a part of that, but not as a fan, but as somebody who's conveying this and who's trying to put it all into perspective. And that's a powerful thing, to be able to have that. I don't want to say power necessarily. That's probably not the word, but just that position that you're in.
It's the job you signed up for. Like journalist, you journaled history in a way that people could process it.
Yes. And so I don't take that lightly. I still don't. I still just treasure what I've been able to be able to witness from sort of a front row seat. And that's why I say it's an honor, is because I was able to be around, one of the great stories in college football history. And that's not to say it's over, to be determined on that. But I think that's the best way I can explain to fans or whoever, is they ask, they're trying to get a better sense of, okay, how do you do your job? And wait, you're not sitting there like we are and eating chicken wings before the game and drinking beer and then like sweating out, they better make this field goal or they better score this touchdown. And I'm just like, no, it's not like that. It's just a totally different existence. But it's an existence that, 25 years into doing it, I still love. I still get excited about the season. I've told myself, hey, if August comes in the future and I'm just like, oh God, I don't really want to watch this game, or I don't really, I don't really get excited about doing it, then that might be time to hang it up. But I can honestly say I still just get just as excited or intrigued or stimulated about the upcoming season or game as I ever have. And I'm lucky. Lucky to be in that position and to still have that, I guess, energy about it.
And it helps now that in 2024, much like 3 years ago, we get to watch these two programs, Georgia and Clemson, open the season. So speaking of, you're in there day to day, boots on the ground. What's the vibe? What's the both fan base as well for the game, as well as team and the energy that's going on with the team as they get ready for the big opening matchup?
The vibe is, I think it's stressed.
It's different than 21, though, right? Like, I'm not feeling
Absolutely.
the same level of anticipation for this from either side. And I think it's because college football has changed underneath both programs. But it feels different than 21 to me.
To me, and there's validity to that for sure. But to me, the reason there's a strange vibe and an uneasy vibe from the Clemson side, as far as their fan base goes, is because it's been the perfect storm. They have lost their place, right, over the last 3 years, at or near the top.
Beginning in the game 3 years ago.
Beginning with that game, and it is salt in the wound to have not only them lose their place, but to see Georgia as the one sort of taking their place. Like, most Clemson fans have big problems with that. There's PTSD type stuff, like, I mean, dealing with the decline over the last 3 years has been hard enough for them because, guys, as recently as 3 years ago, going into that game at whatever, 5 o'clock on whatever that date was, the day of that game in Charlotte, you could have made a great case that, Clemson's just going to keep moving right along here because DJ Uiagalelei, based on what he showed in 2020 in relief of Trevor Lawrence, like there's going to be no drop off. Clemson has the monopoly.
I picked Georgia to lose that game to Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, Clemson has the monopoly on generational quarterbacks. So everything that has happened since then, not just DJ, but then another 5-star who came along who was supposed to come to the rescue and was supposed to be more along the lines of those generational guys. It's been as much of a struggle, maybe more, you could argue. It's early. I mean, Cade has only started for one season, but it's been a struggle. And I would argue it was really naive a few years ago for Clemson fans to think that they were immune to the sort of crapshoot nature of 5-star quarterbacks. I mean, really, I mean, even like the last 2 decades, if you go and look at who has panned out and who has not panned out in terms of being a superstar quarterback, which is what you expect when you get a 5-star.
Coin flip.
It's a coin flip. You bat about 500. And so, like, I don't know what's going to happen with Cade from this point, but let's just say if he doesn't pan out and doesn't give them what they need, it doesn't become a superstar or whatever, that's 500. They had Deshaun Watson and Trevor, who were just right out of the box, just two amazing talents. And then they had 2 more, again, hypothetically.
Well, and it's funny with Deshaun, the first time that I think anyone around the country saw it, maybe in Clemson, the rumors were there. If Deshaun starts that full game against Georgia the first time, Clemson might have a chance to win that.
Hindsight is very, makes that easy to say. I will say there's some context there. Deshaun was a beanpole as a freshman. They knew what they had going into that season. And even beyond how, Dabo is known to be very deliberate, I guess, when he has a veteran quarterback and a freshman challenger, you've got to land a knockout punch, really, for the freshman to unseat the veteran. But I think even beyond that, they didn't want to go into Athens and start him, and either he gets injured or it turns out bad and his confidence is shot for the rest of the year. And so I think that's pretty important context. And I think, that was logical looking back, and the way that he did progress. I think really not to get too far deep into those weeds of 2014, but where I really second guess them is they went down to Florida State a few weeks later. Florida State was a 20-point favorite, and they started Cole Stout. Deshaun comes in. I don't know if it was second quarter, but they had blown an opportunity with Cole Stout. I think he might have fumbled or maybe a goal line situation. Anyway, I'll never forget Herb Street saying halfway through that game, after seeing what Deshaun was doing, this is the future of college football. This number 4, like this kid is really special. So the one that I look back to and Monday morning quarterback is, what if they would have started him against Florida State?
Yep.
Then that game probably would have been different. But anyway, getting back to this perfect storm of why Clemson fans are so uneasy right now, it hasn't just been the decline. It hasn't just been that the decline has coincided with NIL in the portal. And, some schools like Ole Miss, Ohio State, Florida State, maybe South Carolina, they look at the portal like, wow, we've been able to turn things around in a hurry, by going and getting some studs. Clemson fans, they look at it as the opposite. Like, wow, this is a big part of what has, of why we're not as great as we once were. And I don't know if that's totally fair, but we're looking at it through the eyes of a fan. And then you add to that Georgia, which, from 15 to 20, even as Kirby got them to a higher level, Clemson fans looked at the Bulldogs as like, oh, please, you guys are beneath us, and everything started to change, of course, that opening game in 21. And they're a 2-touchdown underdog, and they're having to go basically into Georgia's house, essentially. I mean, I don't think it's going to be overwhelmingly,
probably 2/3, 1/3.
Yeah, I was talking to Gary Stoken yesterday, and he was like, I think it'll be closer to 50-50 because the way we distributed the tickets and da-da-da-da-da, but Georgia fans are good at gobbling up those tickets in the secondary market. And I do know that there are quite a few Clemson fans who are like, boy, I've got my tickets, but do I really want to go and risk being humiliated in that game and have to get up at 5 a.m. to fight that traffic for a noon game? So anyway, it's complicated, but I think as it relates to this matchup, it's just hard for Clemson fans to take, not just that they've slipped, but that their slipping has coincided with Georgia ascending to just an absolutely dominant level. But sorry, I'll just say one more thing. But if Clemson's able to somehow, hang with Georgia in this game, which I don't think is out of the question, given some of Georgia's questions right now, and if Clemson is able to somehow pull this game out, and I'm not predicting that, then everything flips. And college football is very unpredictable. We've seen sharp, wild swings before. So, but that's sort of, I guess, that's a window into the mind of the average Clemson fan right now.
Specifically on Klubnik, the highs with him are really incredible, and you see why he has had the talent and the billing that he did. But the lows and the turnovers and the decision making, you can also see how that would be frustrating for Clemson fans. But I'm especially assuming Garrett Riley in terms of just coaching him, because those are the things against a team like a Georgia or an Ohio State. Those are the things that really get in your way. What is the Cade Klubnik experience like? And then just based on fall camp reporting, is it any different from what we saw last?
Yeah, in addition to the inconsistency and, jitteriness in the pocket and things like that you can clearly see, there were a few instances last year of things I've never seen from a quarterback. And 2 of those that stand out right now, at Miami, you're in overtime and you're coming out of a timeout. And the coaches tell him, Cade, this is a direct handoff to Will Shipley. We're going to go through the A gap on the right side and score a touchdown. And I think they needed a 2-point conversion as well. But the point is, he was just told, this is a straight handoff. This is not a zone read. What does he do? He pulls it. And Dabo Swinney and Garrett Riley are exasperated. A few weeks later, they're playing against North Carolina at home. It's the end of the first half. Forgot what yard line they were on. 4-yard line. They're out of timeouts. Once again, coming out of a timeout, he's told, whatever you do, if it's not there, throw the ball away. There's a pass. Don't run it, Cade. Don't run it. What does he do? he runs it. He has a really impressive effort to score by about an inch. He scores a touchdown, and everybody's happy, but it's still like, what in the world was going through his mind? And so those are the things that were part of the story last year. As to how things have looked of late, I've been encouraged. I think a lot of people have been encouraged by what they've seen and heard so far during camp. To me, it starts with the offensive line. This offensive line last year, when they were all healthy, they were pretty good, but they weren't all healthy for very long last year. They're healthy now. They're actually, so far, they have another scrimmage later this morning, as I say this, on Thursday, August 15th. But so far, the offensive line has been sort of controlling things, which is saying something, because Clemson's defensive line is really good and hard to move around. And I think that has been sort of the foundation for, if you're running the ball well, then you're going to create more advantageous opportunities when Cade pulls it on the zone read. And there's just more space. That in turn creates better opportunities in the passing game. It just all sort of, as you guys know, when Georgia's running the ball, they can throw it better most of the time, off the play action game. And so far, so good. I'm not making any predictions. I mean, I think based on what I've seen of Cade to date in his career, even though, again, he's only started for one season, I think it's totally fair to say, okay, all that's great, but Cade in this offense, you still got to show me. And so that's where I am.
One of the things watching him, because we're getting ready to do sort of a film don't lie previews of the game, one offense, one sort of defense. So really focusing in on the offense first, and watching him towards the latter part of the season, especially in the bowl game against Kentucky, and then even in the spring game, the hesitation that he shows in the pocket when there are clear open options, instead of just letting it rip. Now, when he's on the move and things are it's sort of wide open space and he's outside the pocket, he lets things rip more so. But if it's in the pocket and it's a clear look, one, check the two, all right, rip it, it's there. There's consistent hesitation. And that's something I think you're going to have to see him improve on game one and then also into the season. But the other thing watching, and to get your perspective on this, is when you think about Clemson in the big time run, it was the ability to just go win on the outside in a one-on-one fashion and also down the field in a one-on-one fashion. I haven't seen that recently. And watching at the end of this last year and then the spring game, how important is Bryant Wesco, the true freshman? Because he seems like the one player that might be able to get them a down the field presence, because I just haven't seen it at all.
Well, Brent, I get a lot of sort of enemy lines, sort of question and answer stuff. You get those. That's pretty regular. Going into games and stuff just over the years, and that's some of the best homework I've ever seen, because you really nail. It's as if you're here covering Clemson. So kudos.
That's
to
the
you.
doctor, man. Like he makes me look smart every weekend. I just get on and tell stupid jokes.
It's really impressive, and the film don't lie is outstanding. I hope that your subscribers and viewers have a proper appreciation of that, because it's top notch. Starting with him not seeing things come open. Like 2 years ago when DJ was the quarterback, a big part of their problem was the receivers just weren't getting any separation. They actually were last season, which probably was a product of Garrett Riley, that, under the surface, okay, you see some progress there. They're actually the route combinations and such are actually creating opportunities. But you're right. He's just late. The hesitation. There were people open last year. And even in the spring game, like you said, Trent Pierman, the walk-on third-team quarterback who really stole the show in the spring game, what was he doing that Cade was not? He was throwing on time. He was throwing on time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so that's absolutely an area that he's going to have to improve on once the lights come on, because I think this receiving core they're not, they've had a sharp decline over the last 3 years from what they were, but I think they can be pretty good. And
I mean, how could they not, though, Larry? It's a bit like Georgia's interior defensive line. Like Clemson was breaking the standard for multiple years. Like there has to be a bit of a regression,
right?
But
right.
I understand. Like there's probably more area to have had some talent there than maybe the last 2-3 years.
Well, I mean, the thing is they didn't stop recruiting highly regarded. They didn't stop signing highly regarded receivers. It's just they had a number of them who just didn't pan out, right? Yeah. And that happens too. Mm-hmm. Another perhaps similarity with Georgia's defensive line is it's not for a shortage of 5 stars or highly regarded guys signed. It's just sometimes they don't pan out or they leave or whatever. To your point about Wesco, that was the third one. I'll get to number 2. He's a difference maker. Not just him, but TJ Moore, who got here over the summer. I think Wesco is more advanced right now simply because he was a mid-year enrollee. And so I think he's going to make a difference. He's the type of presence, and TJ Moore as well. The speed and the breaks are just different than what they've been accustomed to seeing the last few years. Also, the ability to adjust to the ball, being able to go up and get it, throwing down the field. I think that's going to be a big boost. To your other point about the 50-50 balls, the back shoulder stuff that has gone from, we saw that in such high volume during their heyday, and we've seen it in such low volume the last 3 years. In fact, I'm just this morning writing about sort of what to look for in the scrimmage today. Adam Randall, who has been here for a couple of years, has been plagued with injuries. He's healthy now. He's a big dude, 230 pounds. We can really run. And one of the big highlights from the scrimmage this past Saturday was him going up and getting some of those 50-50 balls. And so, in fact, somebody told me, I don't know if we had one of those last year that of the nature that Randall was able to bring down in the scrimmage. This was somebody who watched the scrimmage on Saturday. So that's a positive for sure. So you can see them sort of getting back to what they're used to, not a carbon copy of it, but you can see the trajectory sort of pointed in that direction. And then, Georgia's got some questions at corner right now, which that makes for kind of an intriguing sort of matchup thing to watch going into this game because, after losing Lassiter, and a few others. And then Tyke Smith, man, I didn't realize he was really good last year. I mean, from what I've seen on watching Georgia, catching up on some of their stuff the last few weeks, particularly his ability to come down and, really support the outside run defense. It's a physical
He was a very good box player.
Yeah. So anyway, that's something that I don't think the casual observer, as they analyze this matchup, is really going to drill down on. But I think there might be an opportunity there for Clemson to really make some sort of a statement just against some Georgia DBs that aren't really maybe all there yet, if that's fair. And tell me if it's not.
I mean, it's one of those, much like you said, talent is there. You just haven't seen it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with Dayne Everett, I think coming back, I think he will ascend a little bit in year 2 as a starter. Starks in the secondary is one of the best players in the country at his position. It's outside of that, you have veterans with Dan Jackson at safety, but at star where Tyke was and the opposite corner, you've got highly regarded, highly talented players who've played a little bit, but you just haven't seen it on the biggest of stages in a consistent manner. So it's always a question. And
one thing, go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
You can make the argument that in terms of just what Georgia has to prove to be in the national championship hunt deep in the playoffs, it's probably the growth of 3 very young guys, KJ Bolden, Ellis Robinson, potentially, if he's as good as everyone says he is, and then Janelle Aguero at star. If those 3 guys, if even just 2 of them hit and are super contributors this season, that probably gets Georgia where it needs to go.
And also one thing, how we analyze this matchup on August 31st between the receivers and Georgia's DBs. it might. The interesting part to me might not necessarily be, oh, well, can they cover Clemson's receivers downfield? It might actually be the horizontal stuff, because Georgia under Kirby, you can't get anything with that, right? Like the bubble screens
Not normally.
and the end arounds, like and when we just heard Schumann talk about it last week, what did he talk about when asked about the DBs? He said, in this defense under Kirby, block destruction and stopping the run and winning the point of attack. I mean, he emphasized that almost maybe more than he did coverage, right? And so I'm interested to see whether it's still sort of upholding that Georgia standard of, boy, if you throw a little tunnel screen and they're just like blowing up your other receivers and tight ends and you can't get anything on that, then that's might be a long day. But that almost sets up your ability to cover downfield, right? So one sort of plays off the other. And so that's
Clemson, I was saying Clemson, they're like the screen game, the quick game, end around stuff like that's very much a part of their offense.
That's right. That's right.
So switch to the other side of the ball. Clemson's defense, obviously in the matchup 3 years ago, the defensive line and Brissy and some of the guys there was the talk of the matchup. It kind of should be again this year because Peter Woods and then Parker going to be two of the better defensive linemen potentially in the country if they take what they did as freshmen and keep ascending. Outside of those two guys, front seven wise, how is Clemson looking? Do you think it's where they get back to? Because you think back to even the national championship runs that they had, it was elite QB and receivers and insanely good defensive line. Can that kind of get back to that?
Yeah, Barrett Carter, you mentioned front seven, so linebacker Barrett Carter coming back was huge. They did lose Jeremiah Trotter. They moved Wade Woodaz over from the Sam to Mike, but playing inside is just a bear, and particularly against this type of offense, this really kind of pro style. I guess that's fair to say with the way they run the ball and play action, drop back passing and all that. But they love Peter Woods. Peter Woods is just a different dude in the mold of, I think he's going to end his career up there with the greats. And they wouldn't have moved him to end, I don't think, if they didn't feel good about what they had inside. And so inside is where, not as many noteworthy names to the casual observer, but I think in DeMonte Capehart, who's been here a while, but just, he has dealt with injuries. He's like a 15 to 20 snap per game guy until this point. I think he's primed for a breakout. I think Peyton Page beside him is a veteran who's ready to elevate into a starting capacity. I just wonder, Georgia's size, they are huge. And that's not just the offensive line. Trying to disrupt that offensive line alone is hard enough, but then their edge protection is normally so good. Oscar Delt, from what I've seen, is a pretty darn good blocking presence. And then the Stanford transfer.
And Lawson Lucky may be the best blocker at tight end in the bunch.
So I think you could have a Clemson defensive line that does end up being elite. But as I told somebody on our message board just today, that let's not get into this sort of logic of, okay, well, if Clemson's defensive line doesn't spend the day in Georgia's backfield in the opener, that there's some underachiever or disappointment, because Georgia probably has the best offensive line in the country. And so I do wonder about that center position with Ratledge getting so much time there. Was it Jared Wilson? Is that correct?
Yep.
Has the Achilles issue? Is that what it is? Achilles?
Yeah.
But I was just crunching some numbers earlier. You mentioned the previous, generational elite Clemson defensive fronts, and I go back to 2017. Their front line was Cleveland Farrell, Dexter Lawrence, Christian Wilkins, Austin Bryant. Those going into 17 had combined for 42 starts, 3,024 snaps. 2014 was a great Clemson defensive line, even though that was before they really the team elevated to national championship level. They had Corey Crawford Sr., Tavares Barnes Sr., Grady Jarrett Sr., Carlos Watkins Sophomore, Josh Watson Sr., Deshaun Williams, NFL guy Senior, DJ Reader, NFL guy Junior, Vic Beasley Senior, Shaq Lawson Sophomore. The point is these guys, Peter Woods, 2 starts, 307 snaps all last year because he was a freshman. Peyton Page, 0 starts, 527 career snaps. DeMonte Capehart, 0 snaps, 302 career snaps. TJ Parker, 3 starts, 457 snaps. So that's not the. I mean, my point is there's still
not the profile.
Right.
At least going into it.
Yeah, not the profile to make you think, okay, I'm going to bet on them going and just dominating this Georgia offensive line. So still some questions for sure. And one notable thing about this offseason is Dabo and the defensive line coaches they've been putting the heat on Woods and Parker. And I think part of that is these are 2 figurehead types and they're sophomores. And that's not that common for you to have 2 front-facing sort of centerpieces of your program out there, being the sort of the key figures and then only having 1 year of experience. I think ultimately this defensive line is going to be really, really, really good, potentially elite. But as it pertains to this matchup, honestly, I think the more important thing is Clemson's offensive line blocking Georgia enough to establish a fairly consistent running game. If you ask me which is more important, that or the defensive line totally owning things, which I don't think is realistic, I would rather have the offensive line managing and having a consistent inside the tackles running game, kind of like Alabama did last year in the SEC championship game, and have your defensive line sort of holding its own, right? I don't think you have to. I think your recipe for hanging in that game and maybe winning it rests more on the offensive line holding up. Because the last time these 2 teams met, Clemson had 60 plays, 2 rushing yards, 180 yards total, and 3 points. So,
yeah.
To that end, I had 3 individual players that played high school in the state of Georgia I wanted to ask about, the first of which is involved in that running game. So we know Will Shipley's gone, and I thought he was a bit of the eraser for Clemson when they were in a tough situation. Just get it to him last year and try to make something happen. Phil Maffa returns. What's the latest on Maffa and that whole running back room and his spot in there?
Maffa is all the reviews have been great for him. I think Shipley, though he supplied some important contributions, I think the fact that Maffa is clearly RB1 makes him better. Shipley missed the Notre Dame game last year, and Maffa had, I think it was 37 carries, and he just seems to get better with the more carries that he gets. I think he's faster than people give him credit for. And so, if again, the prospect of this offensive line opening some holes and creating creases, I think Maffa is perfect for this type of game. They have questions behind him. Keith Adams Jr. is the clear number 2. Beyond that, almost no experience. And so the biggest concern that I would have in that respect going into this game, it's not what happens when the ball's in their hands, it's pass protection. And, when Maffa does need a breather, are they able to pick up all the different, pre-snap stuff that Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann throw at you? It's not an easy deal with all the simulated pressures and the zone droppers and things like that. So that would be my biggest concern. Maffa is a stud, though, by all accounts. It's just that, outside of him, who do they have?
There was a legendary workout last year, a little covert operation with Dylan Raiola and Sammy Brown working out at Jefferson High School, and it made waves all around the country, especially over at the dog vent. Well, Georgia thought it had the future of its team on that field. One of them is now the quarterback at Nebraska. The other went to Clemson. Sammy Brown, is he in the mix to play early?
He's going to play, but a big part of the beauty of Barrett Carter coming back is it didn't force them to throw Sammy Brown out there more than he could maybe handle this year. I mentioned earlier, those inside linebacker positions, especially at Clemson, for whatever reason, they never have a first-year freshman as a regular starter. And so just a lot to learn, a lot to process. I think Sammy, for most of spring practice, he was swimming mentally after coming in as a mid-year. Then toward the end, he started to get it. And then in the spring game, he really showed up. I mean, he was really some things are just basic. I think I was watching the Trevor Etienne film Don't Lie from y'all just last night. And I think one of y'all made the point of, running back, identifying a good running back is just not hard. Like the average person could just walk by and be like, oh, yep, that's a good running back. Whereas I think it's sort of similar thing in watching a linebacker play. Like he looks comfortable because he's moving around really fast and he's all over the field. You can just sort of tell when they're
always around the ball. Yeah,
always around the ball. You can tell when they're sort of swimming mentally, and you can tell when they're not. And so I think that was easy to see. It's hard for me to predict how many snaps he'll get, but he's backing up both the Mike and the Will right now behind Wade Woodaz and Barrett Carter. But absolute, I think, slam dunk superstar in time. He's just, I think he's going to be a monster.
And then the final one, Brent and I are very biased in this situation because both of our kids, all of our kids go to North Oconee High School. Yeah, you coach KB, Khalil Barnes. He grew up a Georgia fan. Georgia never really got on the trail for him, and it seems like Clemson got a steal in Khalil Barnes.
Yeah, Dayne, I remember you texting me when he signed or committed. You're like, hey, yeah, I know of him, and he might be pretty good, in time, And so my expectation was not that he comes in and just lights it up right away as a freshman, but boy, he just, I don't know. You talk about swimming mentally or lack thereof, and he just, starting with his first spring game, he was all over the field, had a big day, and so.
That part I never worried about. I like everything I've been told. The family he's from, Brent knows it better than I do. Just brilliant kid, very, very smart.
Yeah,
I was worried about top end speed at that level.
Yeah, but he's so versatile, and he played both safety positions last year in addition to the nickel. And right now, Clemson's got some questions at cornerback with some injuries that have happened over the last week or so. I'm wondering whether they're in such a situation where they might entertain moving Barnes to corner to pair with Avion Terrell if, and again, this is if, I don't know this for a fact, if Shelton Lewis and Jaden Lucas, the two older guys, aren't in the mix for that Georgia game. And so he can do it all. He's always around the ball, and just fun to be around too. You can tell he's a great kid. I interviewed David Pollock last fall at one point about him because David and Khalil, of course, are really tight, and it was fun learning more about him. And honestly, Dabo gets a lot of heat for his model of not really being all that interested enough in the portal. Maybe some NIL criticisms too there. But the type of player that they look for and that they're able to resonate with on the part of parents of players and the players themselves, I think there's something to that too. And I'm not certain that the book has been totally written on Dabo's philosophy, because let's just say Clemson has a great year this year, then that's an argument the other way maybe. We're still early in this process. And I've even heard Kirby Smart talk about the sort of essential nature of having guys in your program who go through the slow cook method. He was asked about Carson Beck, I guess at SEC Media Days, and somebody said, hey, is there anything you can do to have other players on your team do the same thing and stay patient? And he's like, well, I'd love to have a chip that I could just insert into every one of my roster where they're going to, place that sort of long-term emphasis on developing and all that, but it's not going to happen. But even he said, I mean, and it was as if, like, if you typed out the quote, you would assume that Dabo said it. They're very aligned in that principle, I think. And I would gather, and you guys that can correct me if I'm wrong, that Kirby, who has been more active than Dabo in the portal the last few years, that he has learned some things about some of these portal guys and some of the drawbacks maybe compared to guys that you identify in high school and that you grow and develop over the years. So it's a fascinating topic, and I think Khalil is kind of a model for that. I hope I don't sound like a Pollyanna here, but this program has lots of really good kids who you can, and it's not by accident, and you can sort of see it, in their various interactions that we get as media members around them.
As that relates to Kirby, I think there's like a pretty wide spectrum, and he'll tell you if you listen exactly what he says. He goes to SEC Media Days. He said Carson Beck stuck it out. He did this thing. We know Carson Beck had looked at the portal multiple times. Fine, but he didn't end up doing it, and totally cool. But the other thing that we've heard Kirby Smart say is people have tried to recruit against Georgia, saying that at certain positions you just can't come in as play as a freshman. He's telling everybody that Malachi Starks was good enough to play the first game that he got to Georgia because he wants to show that that's possible. The other thing that I think Kirby likes about the portal, and we saw this, Brent, who was the defensive end, Brenton Cox that went to Florida, or Bear Alexander when he was on his way out to USC. Kirby was eager for them to go because they weren't the culture fit that he thought they were for that similar reason. Like anyone around the building would have told you, we need Bear Alexander, the player. Bear Alexander, the guy, is not really working. So right now.
Interesting.
And I think when you think about the Dabo philosophy and then Kirby as well, it's what does it take to win championships? And it takes the culture, the buy-in, the depth, the leadership, all these things that are kind of ancillary to actually talent on the field in a way that become a part of what a championship culture looks like. And I think they're kind of in that same vein in a way. They want, like, all these coaches, they want kids to be there and stay and grow and develop, which I even wrote last offseason, right after the season. Like, I think a kid should sign out of high school and have to stay for 2 years, barring a head coaching change. Like, because to me, they need to go through those struggles and they need to, go through a fall and then a spring, and then do they play the following fall and then open in the portal, that sort of stuff. All sorts of big philosophical questions with college football. But ultimately, we got to get back to the actual game. So, Larry, in your mind, we walk away from the game in a couple weeks and Clemson is actually victorious in some way. How does that happen in your mind?
Well, I think it all goes down to the quarterback, Cade Klubnik. Can he give them the presence they need? And that's not, he doesn't have to play great. He doesn't have to own that game. He just has to avoid some of the stuff that we were talking about earlier. And I think, for him to be composed and for him to have the presence they need, I think if the offensive line is able to perform well and is able to sort of neutralize Georgia's defensive front, and I think there's some hope of that happening just based on what we saw last year of Georgia's interior line, and I guess some of the reports we've heard of late with some of the injuries and such. If you can do that, then I think that makes his job easier. If you can establish a running game, I don't think they can run for 300 yards. I'm not saying that, but again, you go back to the SEC championship last year as the example. You go back and watch that, as you guys certainly recall, in the first half in particular, as Alabama was trying to establish itself in that game, they really had some success between the tackles, and that opened up so much other stuff. Something that people haven't really talked about is Cade Klubnik's legs. He can run. He's not Jalen Milroe. I'm not saying that. No. Nobody is. But if you look back to Georgia at Auburn last year, Auburn just really savaged them with the outside zone read stuff, right?
I'll say we actually did a film don't lie on that last weekend, looking at sort of linebacker play and where we thought where growth could happen for Georgia's defense and where similarities within Tech's offense and somewhat of Auburn. We mainly showed Tech, but where that mimics some of what Clemson does offensively.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So I think that's where it starts for sure. And I say this, I don't want to make the mistake of basing so much on what I saw last year, because when you're dealing with a program that stockpiles the recruits that Georgia has, that can be a mistake.
Yeah.
Because it's, who's this guy who is in the backfield all day? And who's this guy who's running for however many yards? Like, I mean, just last week, I looked at some of the running backs beyond Trevor Etienne, because I'm like, okay, if he doesn't start, what do they have? And so I'm looking at the high school tape of the Robinson kids and Frazier, and I'm just like, good heavens, this is ridiculous.
And I tell people they can win with Cass Jones. He's solid.
Yeah, and then their linebacker recruiting has just been ridiculous as well. And so I am not dismissing the idea that they could have a number of dudes emerge in this game, and then, to the point that on Sunday I'm looking back going, boy, I was really stupid in saying that, oh yeah, Alabama rushed for this on them last December, so therefore Clemson can. So a lot of disclaimers have to be attached to whatever I'm saying here.
The spread is the spread for a reason, and
yeah,
those things, and the rankings are rankings for a reason. Those, at least initially. All right, so then now step back, big picture. You talked about the kind of decline over the past. What does a successful season, positive vibe for the fan base look like for Clemson this year, you think?
I think it's the offense getting closer to what they were used to when they were great. It has been torture for Clemson fans to go from Trevor Lawrence and T. Higgins and all that crowd, Travis Etienne, just going up and down the field to what they've seen the last 3 years. And I think it really starts with explosive plays in the passing game. They just have not – they've been bad at that. They've gone from being in the top 10, top 5 every year in that category to around 100 has been pretty standard. And so just getting back to exciting football – and
it's looked like a strain. It has looked like a strain for them where it was so smooth for multiple years. It looks like it takes a lot of effort to get a yard.
Yes, and really, like, if I'm Georgia's defense, if I'm any defense, until I see otherwise, until they prove to me that they can beat me, I'm going to make them manufacture drives. Just make them execute down the field. Sit back and wait for them to make a mistake. Because last year the story was they didn't have problems moving the ball. I think they were top 15 in first downs. And the yards per play, though, was way down. I think like 98th. And so they were sort of, inching
down the field.
inching down the field, but then they would self-destruct and do something stupid. So I think for Clemson fans to really get excited, truly excited again, and to get some of that old spark back, I guess, so to speak, they're going to have to start hitting on some big plays and score points. That's not to say that it's a given that the defense is dominant, but the last 3 years, had the defense not been what it was, we're not talking about 9-4 last year. No. We're talking about 5-7.
Yes.
We're talking about like disasters instead of staying afloat and
feelings.
Say again.
Falling off the cliff.
Yes.
Type feelings.
Yeah, for sure.
I want to get you out of here on this one because this is the follow-up I should have asked. You had access during your time in Augusta to two of my favorite things on this earth. One, Augusta National Golf Club. Two, Claude Felton. What's your best story about one of those?
Okay, I'll start with Claude. Claude is so. I mean, I've dealt with sports information directors who, when you piss off a coach, they call you and they're pissed off, meaning the sports information director. I pissed off Jim Donnan once. I was stupid. I was talking about the perceptions of Donnan, and I quoted a booster from Georgia at one of the rubber chicken circuits, and he said something to me that he thought was just casual, and I quoted him saying it. I forgot what it was, but I ran with it. And, again, when you're young, you learn lessons, and that was one of the lessons I learned, that, hey, man, you got to be professional, and it can't be, I don't know, you just can't be surprises like that. You can't be like gotcha, I guess, so to speak. Claude calls me the next day, and I just had a couple of questions for you. It was just totally respectful and even keeled, and I had no inkling that Jim Donnan was really, really pissed off. But I found that out like at the next press conference when he followed me out of the room and is just giving it to me. I think it was after lunch, because we used to eat lunch over there before the press conference. And anyway, that's a funny story. And then good grief, my short-term memory. Oh, Augusta National. I had never played golf in my life when I moved to Augusta, and the benefit to being in the local media in Augusta is you get to play it once a year in May before they close the course for the summer. And so at one point, I guess I was maybe 2 years into being in Augusta, I'm like, okay, I've covered the Masters and that's great. I said, but if I move on from here, having not taken advantage of an opportunity that most of the planet would kill for, then I'm going to be pretty ashamed of myself. So I took up golf, and there's a municipal course called the Patch that's right beside a small airport, a small municipal airport. So planes are flying overhead the whole time, and they call it the Patch because it's, for good reason. And I lived like a mile from the Patch, and my schedule was such that, I didn't really go into work until sometimes 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I played so much golf at the Patch. I'm talking 5 rounds a week, sometimes 36 holes a day. And I got really good really quickly, to the point where I was shooting in the 80s pretty regularly. And then my only opportunity that I had, it was an absolute monsoon the night before and the day of. Some of those greens were underwater at Augusta National, but played it. And I think I still have the scorecard.
My heart was about to break. I thought you were about to say they told you couldn't play because it was too wet or something.
No, man, it was on. It was if you showed up, you were playing. They had barbecue and beer afterward right there under the tree, and I remember sitting. I mean, even the clubhouse is open to us. You talk about caddy day at the pool and caddy shack. You
got the full experience.
And it was more than 15 minutes. And so John Boyette, the former sports editor of the Chronicle, I'll never forget, we're sitting on the second floor of the clubhouse overlooking the driveway, the famed driveway in from Washington Road, and we got a cooler. I won't say whose cooler it was. It wasn't mine. But there was liquor in the cooler, and we're just sitting there taking sips of our cocktails late in the afternoon on this day, and I'm like, is this really happening? They really let us do this? And so that was my one time. I think it was less than a year later was when the Post and Courier job came open, and I left.
That puts you in an elite club anyway. Because, not many just sports writers get that opportunity. Georgia coaches get that opportunity. I've talked to Coach Donnan about his experience playing at Augusta National, so that's a perk they get. Larry, this has been a blast. I have a suspicion that there is a decent chance that we may be doing more of these in postseason, because with more teams in this playoff, I could see Clemson and Georgia both being involved. And I think that's possible.
Well, for the sake of the climate of my job and dealing with fans and just the overall sort of psyche, again, I'm not saying this, I'm not a fan, I'm not biased, but for the sake of those circumstances, I hope that happens. We need some positive vibes around here and some evidence that they're going to be able to get back, because it's been tough for them. It really has.
Well, I'm just glad that you're reporting on football again and not conference realignment, though that probably continues too.
Still here, still around, my friend. So we'll see what happens there.
Cool. Well, Larry, you're the best. People need to go check out your work and team over at Tag Illustrated. And man, just one of the best rival sites out there. I think we are as well. It's just we're top of the heap, and we can brag about that because that's what we do. Cool. Well, thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, the feeling is mutual too. I'm about to go study up on some of the film Don't Lie myself here when I leave here.
Awesome.